What's up, my wizards of wordplay? I'm Clark Rowanson, the magic engineer, and it's time to talk about magic. In a previous video, I talked about how to create a hard magic system. We're going to continue that theme, this time talking about how to create a soft magic system, because soft magic is kind of like the mystery meat of fiction. You don't know what's in it, but somehow it's delicious. Hopefully. But before we can dig into that pile of mystery meat and how to make your own, we do need to cover some basic definitions. And that's really all going to get back to what I mean when I'm talking about hard and soft magic. Because you may or may not be familiar with Sanderson's first law of magic and the more common version of hard and soft. I talk about it different. If you've been here before, you probably know this. We're going to go over it real quick one more time. Because to me, hard and soft is all a measure of how mysterious or understood your magic is. It doesn't have to have rules and regulations and patterns. If the magic is a concrete thing that can fit into a box and can be measured and quantified, what percentage of that magic system is known or understood? The more that is known or understood, the harder the magic system. The less that is known or understood, the softer the magic system and the more mysterious it becomes. That's why the magic in The Lord of the Rings is just an iconic soft magic system. There are rules and there are patterns and there's information about how it works within the world and within the individual magic users. But as the audience, we know so little that it doesn't matter how structured it is because it's a soft magic system to us. And I've said this multiple times, I feel there is a abundance of focus on hard magic systems lately, especially hard rational magic systems. And even though they are my favorite, I will be honest, I do think that soft magic gets kind of undervalued, and it has a lot that it can bring to the table. If you want to learn more about the different types of magic, I have some other videos that you can go check out. But right now, let's talk about the things that soft magic can do for you. First off, soft magic is fantastic anytime that you want to invoke a sense of wonder, mystery, or horror. If you look at Lovecraftian and cosmic horror, that is textbook soft magic. There's so much that we don't know. In fact, it's unknown and horrifying to the point that it drives people mad. That is prime soft magic. It's just this terrible, tentacly mess that you really don't want to partake in, but you still have a good time. Okay, nobody has a good time, but that's the point of Lovecraftian horror. Even if you're outside the horror genre or you want just more whimsy and mysticism, having the soft magic can build that feeling both in your setting and in your characters. It can be used to create a story in which your characters feel really off-kilter, out of place, and overwhelmed. Potentially unhinged is another way you can go with it. And same thing with the world. There's undiscovered corners and mysteries that abound and these wondrous displays of magical power that just manifest, and we have nothing to do but sit there in awe and do our best to endure, survive, and adapt. All of that kind of stuff is what soft magic can bring to your table. It creates questions, is what it does. And that can really pull in your readers. It can really help them connect to a main character who is out of their depth and floundering, because we've all been there before, and in many cases, your reader might be just as new to the setting as the main character is, which creates an automatic point of sympathy. You still have to do other stuff to make them likable, but this is an extra tool that you have to enhance that experience. Even with just that brief foray into what soft magic can do for you, you have probably seen a couple subgenres where it's very useful. Like I said, Lovecraftian horror, cosmic horror. You've got your portal fantasies. If you wanted to do any kind of fantastical mystery, this is a great place to do that. Urban fantasy is just filled to the brim with soft magic. That's the point. That's something I think I forgot to mention. Soft magic is also fantastic for generating a sense of scale, specifically generating a sense of massive scale. Because even if you decide to really go into the details of particular points of your magic system, if you make it clear that no matter how much we have learned, we are only seeing a tiny piece of the magic, that can really make the world feel much bigger, not necessarily than it is, but bigger than you have actually prepared as the storyteller. And that is a very valuable trick for you to employ. Last, I want to talk about what soft magic can do for you as the storyteller. It can actually take some of the creative load off your shoulders and make it easier to implement and expand your magic system and your setting in your stories. Because since we know it's a soft magic system and at any given time, people are only seeing a small percentage of the entire system, you have more flexibility in terms of what you show and when you show it. So if you only need a tiny piece for your first story, just develop that tiny piece. And it's fine because you can develop the rest later. Now, if you do this, you definitely need to make sure you are still following Brandon Sanderson's first law of magic. And Sanderson's first law is basically a law of foreshadowing, stating if you're going to solve plot problems, you want to show the piece of the magic that is used to solve it before it actually solves it. And if you continue to expand over the course of your series or multiple series, developing your world, just remember that consistency reigns supreme, okay? If you are developing something new, make sure you are not contradicting something you have already put in place. That is the biggest issue with using soft magic in this way. You can, but make sure you don't contradict yourself, or if you do, it needs to be a big deal. Now let's talk about how we do it. How do we make a soft magic system? And there's a couple of specific things that you can do. First off, make the system expansive. This is how a lot of urban fantasy works. Not all of it, obviously, but some of the more iconic ones, specifically I'm thinking about Dresden Files, does that incredibly well, where everything we see about Dresden and the monsters that he interacts with is just a tiny piece of this universe and outside our universe of magic and things that transcend magic. And handling it that way, it's making it a soft system, and he can go into as much detail as he wants about the pieces we see while maintaining it due to the expanse of the system. Because remember, the hard and soft access is all about the total knowledge there is to know and what percentage of that total we know and understand. So you may have a complete textbook, a 200-page textbook, hell, let's say a 500-page textbook about your magic system. That's a lot of information and that's a lot of detail. But if that's only book 1 of 100, that's still a soft magic system. And by making your magic expansive, you can almost treat it like the universe itself and part of the universe itself, where there are parts that are incredibly detailed. All of it is incredibly detailed and nuanced, and there's lots to explore, but it is infinitely expansive and you can never, ever see it all. And that's amazing. The next thing to do if you are making a soft magic system is to focus on thematic and tonal elements of your system. What is it that binds it all together, and make that your emphasis? For example, if we look at Allomancy from Mistborn, because I always have to bring up Allomancy. If you haven't read the series, seriously, go read the series. But if we take that and we strip out all of the detailed rules about how the magic does and doesn't work, and we just left it as magic, as metal magic, where it's that theme of metal and metallics and rigidity and form and potentially malleability, just working with those concepts and working those concepts into everything, we would want to change the effects a bit, not just what it can do, but how people go about doing it. But you can see by focusing on the tone and the theme, we can really lead to a wide variety of possibilities that are very different from the original source and are potentially extremely different from each other just by focusing in on that. So whether you want to do death magic, blood magic, or anything along that vein, focus on the tones, the themes, and the motifs, and just mediums that you put into the magic itself. Before we move to the next point, please do take a second to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Not only does it help with the YouTube almighty algorithm and help people find this content, then you won't miss videos, and it will validate my existence. Another thing you can do to make a softer magic system, especially within the context of your story, is to focus on introducing information slowly and sparingly. As I mentioned before, Lord of the Rings is so soft simply because we don't have information. Now, you can provide all of the information and really get people into the nuance and the detail and the nuts and bolts. You can also pull back and provide next to no information, at which point they're swimming in a miasma of a soft magic system, which might be where we want them. Look, I get it. We spend a lot of time working on this, and we want to share all of the details. We want people to see the nitty-gritty of how it works. But especially if you want a soft magic system, we really need to make sure we're employing a delicate touch. It's probably best to think of it like a potent poison that you're using, a potent seasoning that you're using in a dish. It takes very little in order to add the flavor and profile that you want, but too much and it overpowers and possibly ruins the entire thing. I've just got one more tip on how to make a soft magic system. Again, this goes more within the context of your story and your characters and your storytelling. And that is to have few, if any, characters that truly understand the magic. That's actually going to help you with the previous point, because if the characters don't know, that makes it harder for you as the author to info dump. And if you do, it's going to be very obvious that you're doing it. Again, this is what happens in Lord of the Rings. None of the characters really know anything. And the one character who really does, well, I suppose there's the handful of characters that really do, we don't get to see any of their internal thoughts, really. And that's how it works in horror, right? They don't know what they're up against. And that's how it all ties together. Now, that's not to say you can't tell horror where people do know exactly what they're dealing with, but for the most part, it is that sense of unknown. And even when people do know a bit of how the magic works, they don't understand the whole system. And that lack of information becomes vitally important to the story that is being told. Before we get into the examples, I've got to circle back to one thing. I know I always do this. It just bears repeating. Soft magic does not have to be irrational magic. It doesn't have to be unpredictable. You can still have patterns and cues and information and rules and restrictions and regulations. You can have all of that in a magic system and still make it soft. In fact, that's where a lot of sci-fi sits, because we want the technology to behave and feel like technology, which means it did go through a scientific form of discovery and in theory can continue to contribute via scientific method and extrapolation. And the way you manage that is through these points we've talked about before to make it a small piece of a much larger whole. But again, each type of magic brings something different to the table. So don't feel you are cornered and soft, irrational. You can have soft, rational magic. Now, if you ever want to hear more about this, attend some of my live Q&As, or even just hear from me more regularly than the once a month-ish I get these out, you should consider joining me on Patreon. I would love to have you there, even if all you do is follow my page. Seriously, it would be great. But on to some examples. I brought it up multiple times already, but Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is currently the iconic soft magic system. Because in case, for whatever reason, you aren't familiar with the series, haven't seen the movies or anything like that, here's basically what we know about the magic. Okay, so in Lord of the Rings, there's this ring that has a lot of evil power that they need to destroy. And beyond that, that's pretty much it, really. That's all we know. It's that lack of information that makes it such a soft system. We can't answer how Gandalf's powers work. We can't tell whether he can use it multiple times in a row. We don't know if there are other ways for them to destroy the ring. All we have is the tiny slivers of information that we have been given and how that propels the story forward. Next, I want to talk about Alien. Alien, the movie. You know, the one with the xenomorphs that look like somebody took a scorpion and a spider and blended it all together. Oh, man, that monster is so good. That is another soft magic system. It's also a soft irrational system because, I mean, who would have predicted that it was going to bleed acid? Come on. As you go through the movie, and especially as you go through the series, but let's not get into all of that detail, we learn more, but even by the end, there is so much that is unexplored, unexplained, and just terrifying about this creature and what its capabilities are, that it still sits in the soft magic quadrant. So, again, horror, soft magic, they go so well together. Then there's the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I know what you're saying. You're screaming at the screen right now saying, you told me it was a hard magic system. And it was in phase 1. In phase 1, it starts with a very narrow focus on a small cast of people, and they are the extent of the magic. Then as we go through the series, it gets broader and broader and broader as they bring in more of the Marvel comic universe. And by the time we get to the end of phase 3, we have seen different star systems, different galaxies, dozens, if not hundreds of different alien races. And there's dozens, if not hundreds more alien races out there. Not to mention the different forms of technology, the different magical power sources, the different types of just entities and beings that exist in this expansive, ever-expanding world. So what starts as a hard magic system becomes a soft magic system. How cool is that? Last, I want to talk about Star Wars. And no, I'm not getting into which of the movies are better. That's not what this is about. When we're looking at this, this does hold pretty uniform throughout all of the movies. The Force, what we understand about the Force, is a soft, irrational magic system. There is one moment where they tried to make it more rational and people really didn't like that. And it has mostly stayed a soft, irrational magic system. And the tech, on the other hand, is a soft, rational magic system. For all of the reasons I talked about before, we want it to feel like these ships were generated via science, even if it's just science we don't understand. So from there, we can extrapolate new techs, new applications, but we know we haven't seen it all, and we will likely never see it all simply because of the size of the universe and the amount of tech that there is to explore and learn about. And the Force is much smaller in scope, but much more nebulous, and there's a lot more unknowns and uncertainties about how it functions and what it can do. And that's all for this video. Hopefully by now you have a better understanding of what soft magic systems can do for you and how to make them. Primarily, again, it can provide a lot of thematic and emotional feelings to it, senses of wonder, senses of horror. And to do that, you want to focus on being expansive, really focusing on your themes, making sure that you introduce the information slowly and carefully, and maybe even just making it so there's very few people who actually know how it works. So if you like this video, again, like, subscribe, consider joining me on Patreon. I would love to hear from you there. But whatever you do, make sure that you keep writing and stay awesome.